FAs tend to like take on a million different things. I don't need any help. I can do this. I can raise the kid. I can do my job. I can clean the house. I got all this. But really, like, they can be like struggling so bad on the inside.
For fearful avoidance, because they think that they like need to show up and have all this pressure on themselves in terms of showing up in relationships, I think the vast majority of fearful avoidance, before they know about their attachment style, don't even realize that they need space.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I'm here today with our wonderful co-host, Mike DeZio. And if you're new here, basically this podcast talks all about our different attachment styles. And we often share a lot from our individual viewpoints, having been a fearful avoidant attachment style myself and moved to secure attachment style, and Mike having been a dismissive avoidant attachment style and done the work to become securely attached. So we're going to share with you a whole bunch of different powerful insights today. And we're specifically going to dive into what the fearful avoidant attachment style's ideal relationship looks like and what they're secretly hoping for a lot of the time without actually communicating. And we're going to talk about how some of that actually manifests as expectations in a relationship that can become unhealthy if left unchecked. So we're going to dive in. And I hope that if you're listening on YouTube, you check us out on iTunes, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. And we can also keep you company on your drive to work. You can check us out there. Or if you're listening on your favorite podcast streaming device, then you can also check us out on YouTube for the full video version anytime. So, Mike, if you want to kick off, we can start by just diving a little bit into some of what we talked about briefly last time, which was those initial attachment style expectations of the fearful avoidant, where like this is what they secretly want in a relationship, but they sometimes come up as unhealthy expectations instead.
Yeah, for sure. And as I mentioned last time too, like I think most of my past relationships were with FAs. So I have like a really good insight into what it was like sort of on the DA side of things to be with an FA and some of the challenges and some of the benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm excited to dig more into this and then hear your perspective as well. So we'll start with the first one. The FA would love it if you knew what I wanted and needed without me having to tell you. So as much as we would love to be that much, in sync with our partner and think that, if you love me, like you'll know exactly what I need. That's a really nice sentiment. However, it's really tough when you think the other person knows everything that you want at any given time. And even worse, like I could probably bring up like, by just thinking about this, but like when a partner is mad at you and they say like, you can obviously tell they're mad about something and you're like, hey, like, what's up? Like, obviously there's something wrong. No, nothing wrong. And you're like, okay, come on. I know like you're quiet or something's going on here. Like, let me know. They're like, no, nothing. And it's just really uncomfortable. And then you feel like you're walking on eggshells because I'm racking my brain going like, okay, where did I screw up in the last 24 hours? Did I take out the garbage? Yeah, I did that. Did I make a negative comment about an outfit? Like I'm just racking my brain and trying to find where it screwed up. And then the DA already thinks that they're kind of like a screw up in relationships. So then you have this extra pressure of like, oh my gosh, like I need to figure out what I did wrong. Otherwise, like I'm going to feel the wrath of the FA, which is really, could be really scary sometimes. So I just wanted to give that perspective of that. It could be really challenging because sometimes we just don't know exactly what we did. And it's like, please just tell us, like, let's just get to it and just say what we did so we can kind of talk about it and move on from it. Because it could just be really uncomfortable and really, it could feel like an eternity when somebody's not talking to you or giving you the cold shoulder and you just don't know what's going on. Totally. Do you have any comments about that? Did you ever do that back in the day?
Absolutely. I'll be honest. So I want to share like for people listening to like when I was fearful avoidant, like what was going on inside of me when that would happen. So here's the first thing for sure. I love that one because it's so true. Fearful avoidance, like when we look at an anxious attachment style strategy, for connection, for like actual attachment, it's to maintain proximity. It's to like get closer and closer to somebody all the time. You see that in all their activating strategies, pretty common knowledge. Dismissive avoidance is like to maintain their space and their distance, their independence, because that's what made them feel safe and in control if they went through childhood emotional neglect. Fearful avoidance, because they usually grew up in a system of chaos, their attachment strategy is to be hypervigilant. It's to read between the lines about everything all the time. So on one hand, it can give somebody like a superpower to like really notice things about people and really like check and see when something's off. And it gives them a quote unquote superpower to kind of like really be able to see into other people's needs very easily, to like know when they're feeling hurt or frustrated or why and what they might be experiencing. And so that can be a great thing. But where it becomes a detriment is when, because you do that and because that's your attachment style strategy, you actually think subconsciously, you expect that like everybody else is just like you. And so for me, I would constantly like notice when things were off with people, or notice if they weren't having a good day, or be able to kind of like look 2 steps in the future to like what they might need next in a relationship. And then when that wasn't reciprocated, I would make it mean like, oh, they don't care about me the way I care about them, rather than like understanding the truth, which is that that's just not as well of a developed attachment strategy as it is for somebody like me. And so
Right.
I would really take that personally. And then to your point too, if I also on top of that was hurt by something, I didn't know how to talk about it vulnerably. So I would shut down and be frustrated because I felt too much emotion to just be able to suppress it and pretend like everything's fine. But I also,
Mhm.
as a fearful avoidant at the time, didn't know how to articulate my feelings and needs. So you get left with this, like, it seems like it's like intended sometimes to like punish or to like give the silent treatment or like show you how it is. But a lot of the times it's actually more just, I'm hurt. I'm like really upset about something. I don't know how to communicate it in a good way. And I don't feel like being vulnerable to you because you just hurt me. So
Right.
instead, I shut down. I hold that really tight. I like try to repress it, but you can still see it on my face, or I'm still like giving the cold shoulder, or coming out in a certain way with it. And that's where it like leaves somebody being like, what the heck? Like just communicate your
Mhm.
needs. Like what's going on? Like just talk to me. But a lot of the time it's like you're caught in this like catch 22 where you don't want to be vulnerable and don't really know how, but you're also
Yeah.
hurting and can't repress it either. So to your point, it's such a great expectation that you shared, because that's often an operating like thought. Like fearful avoidants are like, oh, this is how people should be because that's how I am in a relationship.
Right, right, right. Is there also an aspect though of eye for an eye a little bit? It's like you made me feel this way, and there's no way that I'm not going to let you feel the pain that I'm feeling. Or maybe is it because I'm beating myself so much internally that like if I'm feeling pain, I want you to know how hard it is to be me. So I'm going to give you a little taste of like how this
Your own
feels.
medicine.
Is there? Yeah, yeah. Like maybe that sounds harsh, but I remember my past relationships. I would even laugh sometimes because it was to the point even like, I do silly things or like throw a ball at somebody, hits them on the head. The ex would be so mad and like grab a ball and have to like whip it back at me just to be like, to get even, like eye for an eye. Like there's no way they were letting that slide and just being like laughing about it. So
Yeah.
is there any aspect of like eye for an eye where I kind of want you to feel how I'm feeling right now?
100%. So I would
Yeah.
call that like sort of a last resort. So I'd say it like kind of happens in stages for fearful avoidance. So the first stage is like, I'm hurt and I'm shut down and I don't feel like being vulnerable to you because you just hurt me and I'm just going to shut down, but you can still see it on my face, like that kind of thing. And then I find a lot of the time, if there's a buildup of things like that over time, or a buildup of that particular issue that's gone unresolved for long enough, once a fearful avoidant then feels unseen and unheard and like misunderstood in their frustration for long enough, then they become spiteful. So it's definitely not necessarily like their starting point. But if there's a buildup of feeling that way for a while, or, about a series of events, or there's like, this event is really triggering, we haven't resolved it and it's gone on, and then it's built up for a long time, eventually fearful avoidance will use the spitefulness. And you know this because you're getting at it. I can hear it in what you're saying. Like spitefulness is sometimes a subconscious strategy to be seen, to be heard, or to be understood, or even for
Right,
like emotional connection in a way. Because either it's like, I'm now going to give you a taste of your own medicine, make you feel what I was feeling, and now you'll finally see, hear, and understand what I was just feeling, or I'm going to do this back to you and you're going to feel how I was feeling. And at least we're feeling the same thing. And it's kind of like we're emotionally connected. And so
right.
obviously, like neither of those are good things. But when a fearful avoidant doesn't know any better, doesn't, it hasn't done the work yet, or doesn't even know about their attachment style and their wounds, then of course you'll see that as like a more likely outcome.
Sure. I could honestly see how it would be super frustrating too. Like if an FA was dating an avoidant, like if they're just not getting anything, but the DA was not really didn't have caregivers that were like really attuned to their like emotional needs. So the DA is kind of just going to be a little bit ignorant in that area and not really know if somebody's like really upset or really struggling or know exactly what they need. So, for any FA out there, it's the better route is to probably just say what's going on for you. I know it's vulnerable. I know it's so scary, but really like it's going to be such a longer, more painful process to hold it in and sort of stew with it and wait for your partner to kind of figure it out. Because like hardcore DAs are probably not going to figure out sort of what they did wrong. Maybe in some instances, but just in general, like I just remember getting in trouble for not knowing exactly what it was and then finding out what it was. And then, okay, here, let me explain my intention there. Like, oh yeah, I could see how that would be upsetting, but like, I had no idea that was upsetting to you. Like when I said this comment, I didn't know that was such a sore spot for you or such a wound. So it's like, give the information so we can at least let you know the sponsoring intention, because most of the time it wouldn't be something malicious or whatever.
100%.
And then one more thing I'd love you to comment on is, the black and white thinking of the FA. So like if you didn't do something, like you were late picking them up from an appointment or something like that, but it was because maybe you ran into a relative and you were just sort of having a conversation that went on a little longer than you expected. So the FA might think, oh, I'm disrespected or I'm being like completely not cared for. So they can kind of be black and white and not really, there's no gray area of like what could have been the issue. There's no sort of talking through the issue and saying like, oh, hey, well, you know what? Like, of course I care about you, but literally I just ran into somebody and was just talking for a few minutes extra. So I was just wondering if you could speak to why this sort of, there's no sort of middle ground. It's kind of like you're either screwed up and I don't want to hear any of it, or, you're good.
I want to dive into it. It's such a good question. But I want to just say a couple other things to what you said earlier. So what I would do, and I know you and I have talked about this on this podcast before, is for me, when I didn't speak. So I just want to like highlight Mike's point for anybody listening just a second ago. Like Mike was like, it's always going to be easier to just talk about it. Because a lot of times avoidants are much more understanding than you think when you communicate vulnerably and like clearly. And that goes for everybody. That goes for secure attachment styles, anxious attachment styles. Like if you just say vulnerably what's on your mind or what hurt you, you're going to get a much better response than you probably imagine. And you'll also see that like it kind of reinforces the avoidance fears, right? Oh, they're not going to talk to me. See, I'm doing something wrong. And then they just shut down. And then often what you would see is that between at least an FA and DA, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but my husband, when I met him, still had some dismissive avoidant attachment style. You know that, but like for our audience, and there'd be this cycle where like his behavior could hurt me. And I still had work to do to communicate my needs more openly and like earlier. And so when I would then shut down a little bit or pull away a little bit. And then he would kind of be like, oh, she's shutting down. Why? And shut down back. And then I would be like, oh, you're shutting down after you hurt me. And it's like this cycle of like, and then you're feeling like frustrated even more. And you'll see these cycles like in relationship dynamics. And it goes like, you can have its own cycle with an SA, with an AP. So anyways, and most of all, one of the best things you'll ever do if you are a fearful avoidant is learn how to communicate, because you'll finally realize like, oh, people around me care about me so much more than I think. They just didn't have the information they needed before because I was holding it so close to my chest and wasn't like actually opening up. And also not only that, but also I can't tell you how many times before I did the work, I, as a fearful avoidant, would think that people didn't care. But in retrospect, I realized, oh, I just always seemed good. Like I always seemed like I had it together. Everything was perfect. I can handle it, like tough, strong, whatever, like perseverant. And it was really meaningful for me to like learn as a human being that, hey, if I had a busy day or a busy week or need support or I'm going through a hard time, to just talk about it, to just share and make that normal. and then allow for people to be like, hey, I'm here, or like, what do you need? Or even just tell people what I needed directly. And that was so healing and made me feel like my relationships just like got so much better, so much more like reciprocal everywhere. So anyways, it's just, I wanted to just double highlight what you said. And wait, last thing too,
Yeah.
also fearful avoidance and what we talk about all the time is if you don't say it in the moment, the thing that upset you, you'll do what I did, which is like an hour or two later, you get mad about something silly, like the cupboard being left open, or like something silly that's not related because you don't know how to process your emotions and you don't know how to be vulnerable about the thing that actually upset you, which just causes chaos in the relationship without ever resolving the initial problem to begin with. So that's another really important thing. So you raised a lot of good stuff there. But yeah, to go back to your original question, the all or nothing thinking absolutely plays a role. So all or nothing thinking is associated with more trauma in relationships. Usually people, when they have more trauma, they are more likely, like there's a direct correlation with being more likely to think in all or nothing thinking patterns as an adult, because of course, when you go through extremes, you're going to think and perceive in extremes, which then creates more extremes in your life going forward. So, you know, if you were late picking someone up and, you know, that person's a fearful avoidant and you ran into a relative, like you're intending to be there for them, your intentions are good, but you're late, what happens is the fearful avoidant's quick to jump to their core wounds. So they might be like, oh, they weren't telling me what they were doing. I was being betrayed, or they don't care about me. I'm unloved. Like, you know, there can be these thoughts and belief patterns because of their own unresolved core wounds from the past where they were made to feel that way, potentially in childhood, that cause them to project that out. And then it creates extreme interpretations of the event at hand, causing them to then feel hurt in that scenario. And really, you're just hurting yourself, right? Like that's the fearful avoidant hurting themselves. It doesn't mean don't have needs. It doesn't mean don't say, hey, it's important to me that you're on time, or to set a boundary if the person's never on time for things, you know, things like that. But I think that it's so important to also make sure we're not just jumping to conclusions and storytelling, because that's us really creating a lot of our own suffering from those core wounds.
100%.
I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below.
Shout out to Joanna Locke. She's a coach with PDS, and she always says FA is the hardest attachment style to be. She said it's like walking in a minefield and constantly kind of hitting triggers, like the bombs in the minefield. But in the comments, anybody watching, what do you think the hardest attachment style is? Which do you think is the most challenging? It's interesting to sort of hear what different people think about it.
I totally think like each attachment style has its own upsides and downs.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah, for sure. Just to transition to my next point here, you sort of touched on it, but I think it's important to sort of dig into this more. They want someone to unburden them and help carry the load. So of course, somebody would want someone to help, and FAs tend to like take on a million different things. I don't need any help. I can do this. I can raise the kid. I can do my job. I can clean the house. Like I got all this, but really like they can be like struggling so bad on the inside. And to your point before, you said sometimes they can come across as like, I'm good. I'm strong. I'm good. Like nothing can stop me. But really they're like, really need some help. And the problem is if you're dating somebody who's dismissive avoidant, if you're not kind of asking for it, and you look like you're doing okay, like you're not like struggling, we just think, oh, okay, this person's like a high functioning, wow, they have way more energy than I do. Like they're very high functioning. They enjoy having juggling all these different balls in the air, and they seem to do it without complaining until we get that resentment build up and there's a huge blow up. So I understand that an FA would love for someone to come in and just take sort of some of the load off of them, let them be able to relax and just like not have to do a million and one different things. That would be great. But sometimes with certain partners, you're going to have to ask, you're going to have to vulnerably say, hey, this week I have so much going on for me. Would you be able to do X, Y, Z for me? That would free up so much time and just a little more time for me to relax. Your partner will probably be like, yeah, for sure. Like, of course, I didn't know you were struggling so badly. So I just wanted to touch on that a bit and want to know if you had any comments on that one, in sort of subconsciously wanting somebody who's gonna take the load off of them, but not really saying when they need help.
Yeah, it's such a good one. It's such an important point. I just want to ask you first if you can share
Mm-hmm.
when you were dismissive avoiding, because you said you mostly dated FAs. Um,
Yeah.
if somebody came to you and they were vulnerable and because I think this is going to really throw a pin in what people expect. If they were vulnerable to you and they were like,
Yeah.
let's say you're in a committed relationship, you're dating them for a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, and they're like, hey, I really need help. I need support. I'm going through a hard time. Here's specifically what I need help with. Do you think you can do it sometime this week? And they don't say this right now. It needs to be exactly this. It's on an ultimatum. It's like, hey, sometime
Yeah.
this week, I could really use your support. Are you able to show up? And they're vulnerable and kind about it. What do you actually feel as a dismissive avoidant at the time?
Probably a little bit of resistance, or I'm like, oh, like, come on, like, this is my relaxing time, or come on, like, I don't want to, when I'm at home around the house, I don't want to have to do these things. But if I can see it's causing them, like, they're really like, hey, like, please, I need help with this. Of course, like, would want to show up and do something to help them, to help ease their burden. But I wouldn't want them to just like push like a big percentage of their stuff onto me. Like, just because you're a high functioning, high achieving, want to be productive 24/7 type person, don't push that on me. Like, I don't, that's not the way that I operate. And I need my recovery and sort of, yeah, recovery time. I wouldn't have as much energy as like usual FAs might have. So it would be a lot of resistance if there's any expectation of me having to do even close to the amount of stuff that they do.
So can I take it a step further? So let's say, so I hear 2 points. I hear point number one, there's a little resistance, and
Yeah.
kind of like under that umbrella is also a dynamic of like, which is fair, right? An avoidance saying, hey, just because you take on all these things and pile your plate sky high and do all these things
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I suddenly have to also be operating under those same pretenses, which I think is
Right.
very fair and I think is appropriate.
Mhm.
But you also said like if somebody really vulnerably asks, even though there's like a little bit of resistance and maybe fear of taking on too much, if it's like one thing, like, hey, I really need you to take my car in, it's just down the street. Can you drop it off? Like if it's something specific that they can ask, or
Yeah.
it's not like, hey, take half of the things on my plate. What do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
No, for sure. If it's talked about before, you might have to like poke a couple times, like, hey, like, I remember I need that done by Thursday. Like, that's important. I probably might need like a reminder or two, like this needs to be done at this point. But it would get done. Like, if the person's telling me like this is really important to me, then it'll get done for sure.
And I think as long as
Okay, trust me. Like, I don't know.
and like if you're dating, if somebody's listening to this and you're dating an avoidant or you're dating an anxious person or another fearful avoidant, whatever it is, like I think there's this really happy medium, right? And this is where we get into like, well, what's the expectation versus like the healthy reality, right? So the expectation is somebody should unburden me. And the healthy reality is like, it's okay to ask for help. And I think that comes with like the ability to ask for help. And if somebody really cares about you and is willing to show up, they will. But it also doesn't mean that you should be having them operate under your pretenses. I think it's an important point that you raise, which is like just because you pile your plate sky high doesn't mean that somebody should have to work. For me, if I'm somebody who like loves to work and like is so passionate about what I do, it doesn't mean that like my husband has to be working the same amount of hours that I do or having the exact same degree of passion that I do about things because he's
Sure.
his own person with his own needs and domain. And I think that's an important point. But
Mhm.
you should also have somebody who's doing the work who's going to show up and help support you and be there. And if it's like, hey, I really need this favor in a crunch, I really need help and support. And it's not like something you're asking for every day, but something you're available, to say, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm needing. It's an important
Mhm.
thing to be able to do in the relationship.
Great points. I'd love to bring up one more point too. It's that I've actually freed up so much more energy from healing from some of the DA wounds. So
Yeah.
actually, whereas when I was hardcore DA, when somebody would ask me for something, I'd be like, Like
I
do
have
it
no
yourself.
bandwidth.
Leave me alone. Yeah, I feel like I'm too tired or like I just don't have the energy or the motivation to do it. But I feel like after doing like the healing work or whatnot, you just get a lot of energy back because you're not sort of in that low level fight or flight where you're using a lot of thought energy, to be honest. It's not because you're out there, on the construction site doing all this physical work. It's just literally you're kind of in your head all the time. So when you can kind of get back into your body and be more sort of present, you actually like get a lot of energy back. So that's something I'm actually really proud of because I always used to label myself as lazy. I always thought I was a lazy person. And even like my mom would say, "Oh, you're so lazy," like when I was young, right? And I would kind of agree. Like I wouldn't want to do housework, I wouldn't want to make my bed. Like I just wasn't super motivated to do a lot of the stuff that I should be doing. Maybe some of them weren't in my needs sort of structure, but I just literally I thought, oh wow, I'm born a lazy person. But like now in the last few years, I realized that like no, a lot of my energy was being spent on like worrying and fear and like feeling unsafe. The I'm unsafe core wound is a big one that sort of sucks a lot of energy. So when you can kind of heal some of these wounds and then bring yourself back to like a more stable state, you actually have a lot more give and a lot more energy for whatever. So I've noticed too, when people ask me for stuff, I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, just let me know when. Like, I'm just a lot more. It's not a big deal at all anymore. So that's another benefit to wanting to yield DA.
100%. And like what Mike's talking about for people who are less familiar, which I think a lot of people listening probably are, but like one of the big things we focus on at PDS is like how to reprogram core wounds. Because if you are constantly using your thought energy throughout the day, which creates an emotional response, which creates a neurochemical response, right? So like if you're constantly thinking, I'm not good enough, or I'm going to be abandoned, or I'm going to be seen as defective or criticized, obviously, depending on what your attachment style is, then you think those thoughts, you feel those emotions, you have those neurochemical reactions like cortisol, norepinephrine, like coursing throughout your body. And that actually has an impact on your nervous system and how you feel. And so it's very common for dismissive avoidance, along with fearful avoidance and anxious attachment styles in their own unique spaces, to have these core wounds that run their life and take up so much of their energy. And it's so big for dismissive avoidance because a lot of how they try to cope with that is to repress. And so what you'll see a lot of times is dismissive avoidance have this like sense of, I don't have the bandwidth because they're constantly in this kind of fight or flight space. And I'm going to fact check myself in advance because I'm not 100% sure if this is true, but I'm pretty sure your brain, I read this like not too long ago, uses like 23% of your daily energy, which is pretty
Yeah,
crazy if you think about it.
yeah, yeah.
How much energy?
And while you're checking that too, yeah, emotional repression, I believe that also takes energy to like repress emotions and like stuff them down instead of just letting it flow and processing it and letting it out and getting on with it.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So, according to the National Institute of Health, your brain, tracing oxygen consumption, the brain accounts for 20% of the body's energy consumption, despite only representing 2% of its weight. It's interesting. I know this, so it's not like exactly the way we're thinking about it, but it's like close enough. Like it has a huge impact. So if you were using a lot
yeah,
of your brain power also to create negative neurochemical reactions because you're thinking and feeling negative ways, of course you
yeah,
don't have the bandwidth. And that's a huge part of healing. And as a fearful avoidant in the past who did all this core wound reprogramming a ton, it was like all of a sudden all this energy got freed up to use for like creativity and connection and like building and growing instead of constantly defending myself against my projected core wounds into the future, like fearing somebody's going to betray me or think I'm not good enough or abandon me. Like that's exhausting. So I
yeah.
love that you said that. I think it's such an important point.
Why, while we're on this topic, why do FAs not tend to um, burn out as much? Like, how come FAs have the bandwidth and can keep kind of like redlining it for
It's
so
such a
long?
good
Is that because
question.
their wounds kind of light such a fire under their butt that they have to just keep going? Otherwise, they're not going to survive.
It's the way we've all been designed, conditioned, really, not designed, conditioned to deal with our core wounds. So a lot of times, fearful avoidants, when they feel these core wounds, a lot of them are based around feeling like unworthy or not good enough or being seen as bad. And so they'll often cope with that core wound as their behavioral coping mechanism to like go full force into avoiding having to feel like that by showing up in their
Right,
actions. And a lot
right.
of times, fearful avoidants kind of get like a positive emotional response from those things. Like if you people please somebody, initially you might get a better, interaction with somebody. It's just the downsides that you'll suffer later from the self-abandonment that ensues. And
For
so
sure.
a lot of times we're dismissive ones are trying to repress and stuff down, and that causes them to just try to stay in creature comforts that numb out their emotions and be preoccupied with that. Fearful
Yeah.
ones often are like trying to solve the problems immediately, deal with them immediately. And so that cortisol, norepinephrine response will often condition them to go into action. Whereas
Mhm.
dismissive avoidance are trying to basically go into inaction because they're trying to avoid the problem a lot of the time. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
behaviors we have next to when the wounds are triggered, they really determine that output.
Right, right. That's so interesting. We DAs should have the most energy because they're avoiding like the big problems, no?
Well, do you ever notice that a lot of a lot of the avoidant coping mechanisms are things that drain your energy? I used to say to people all the time, notice the difference between there's kind of two parts of this, but notice the difference between things that give you energy back versus steal your energy when
Yeah,
you're comforting yourself. Like
yeah.
if I were to sit down and watch television for 3 hours, like sit down and just binge watch a show or something, I'm not going to feel better at the end. I'm just going to feel stale. Like I'm just going to have this feeling of like, oh, I didn't really, but if I meditate for half an hour and then journal, those kinds of things, they give you energy back. Like they fill your cup back up. And so we have different coping mechanisms and some of them steal our energy. And for dismissive avoidance, it can be binge watching TV or playing video games for hours and hours or drinking a bunch of alcohol and just kind of chilling and sitting with yourself but you're drinking, you're numbing, you're not like with yourself.
Yeah,
And so obviously avoidance have all sorts of different mechanisms, but a lot of the things that they do don't actually replenish their energy. And then second to that, pure avoidants often spend a lot of time too trying to design how they cope so that they cannot feel not good enough or unworthy or bad or worthy of rejection. So they'll do a lot of things that stimulate more energy, maybe drink extra coffee, maybe,
yeah,
whatever it is, things that keep them up in this kind of high performing state so that they can be worthy of love and connection.
yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
like a two-way street there.
Right, right. That's so interesting.
So the summer is coming to a close, and now it's time to welcome in probably our much busier season. And if you're anything like me, the last place you probably want to be spending time is figuring out what to eat for dinner and standing in long grocery store lines. So you can make life easier with HelloFresh, which is America's #1 meal kit. With fresh ingredients and simple recipe cards delivered straight to your door, HelloFresh takes care of all of your meal planning, shopping, and meal prep. And I really can't express how much time HelloFresh has actually saved me each and every week. What I love most is the variety. So whether you're looking for fit and wholesome or quick and easy, vegetarian, or even family-friendly options, their ever-changing recipes keep food exciting when it comes to dinner and never leave me feeling like I'm making the same meals and just eating the same food over and over again. So if you're ready to save time and make cooking much more enjoyable for you and your loved ones, you can go for free breakfast for life at hellofresh.com/free Thais. That's THAIS. And you'll get one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to hellofresh.com/free Thais. THAIS.
The next item would be someone who respects their need for space. So not as much as the DA would need their space, the FA does also have periods where they need to be alone, like get away from me, I need my alone time, I need my space. Did you ever feel encroached on, or would you speak up to take your space? Like, what was sort of the ideal situation for you with needing space from a partner?
It's such a good question. So here's what's really interesting about it for FAs, and that's why I wanted to kick it off is when you're in that, you often don't realize that that's what you're experiencing. You just feel irritated by people. And so you're in a situation where, like, for dismissive avoidance, I think they tend to know that they need more space and alone time, even if they
Yeah.
also don't realize it till they feel irritated. For fearful avoidance, because they think that they like need to show up and have all this pressure on themselves in terms of showing up in relationships, I think the vast majority of fearful avoidance before they know about their attachment style, not all of them, but the vast majority don't even realize that they need space. They just feel irritated and then they just kind of shut down and disconnect. And
Mm.
people should know that I need space. Expectation is almost like retroactive. It's not ahead of time. It's like once they've like shut out the world, and totally retreated. Then when people are like giving them a hard time, like, where are you? Why did you drop off? And they're getting a hard time from people. That's when they're like, people should leave me alone. And so it's
Yeah.
usually like from that space. And I used to have these clients, this wonderful family of um, people, and they were so wonderful. And they used to joke that, oh, it'd be like the FA coma or the DA coma. And the joke was that like literally you just retreat so much, you were like cutting off the outside world, and you're really going into that kind of space where it's like you really just disconnect. And unfortunately, a lot of those times it's like your creature comforts, right? It's like it's not like you're disconnecting and replenishing with a good meditation or a good book. You're like disconnecting and numbing out your feelings, your emotions, your experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. And just being the partner of an FA in the past is to see how sometimes they're wanting that connection so bad. They could be very physically affectionate and like wanting to hang out all the time. And then all of a sudden it just like drops off completely and you're like, whoa, what happened? Where did you go? But then, I'd be such a hypocrite to be like, oh, you shouldn't take your space. But, if they'd say like, oh, I've been peopling too much, or I've been, I just really need a bit of space, then of course I'm gonna be like, okay, that's cool.
I've been
But
peopling
even
too much. I've never heard that before.
no, really? Oh
No.
yeah, for sure. When I get that sometimes if you're peopling, you're like, okay, I need to be by myself and only be around like animals or technology. But
That's so funny.
no, it was so interesting. It was almost like Jekyll and Hyde. Like this morning you were so like huggy and affectionate, and now you're like, kind of like get away from me. So
And what would you say when that happened? Like, would you understand it because you were an avoidant at the time, or were you like, what is going on? Like, would it like land poorly with you?
I do remember how what you said about the irritability. Sometimes the irritability would come out of nowhere, and I'm like, okay, like obviously I think this person doesn't want to, no, I don't want to be around somebody who's irritable, so I'm gonna remove myself. Um, but I'm trying to think what happened in the past there. Yeah, I don't ever remember anybody sort of really verbalizing it and just saying, hey, like it's not you, but like I just need my own space right now. Um, but it wasn't until sort of more secure relationships more recently that the person will just say like, hey, I, I'll try to make you laugh again. I've been peopling too much. I actually just need a break from like everyone. So like I'm gonna take tonight off. I'm just gonna have a quiet night in, even though we might have plans like that night, but they've just had such a sort of rough day that they want to be alone. And when you communicate that and say that, that's like, yeah, of course. Like I'm gonna want that once in a while. So why shouldn't you be allowed to have that once in a while? So
100%. Yeah. And
yeah.
like sometimes I have an experience now, like where I'm like, so I'm secure, obviously, but I'm an introvert. Nobody believes me when I say that, but I truly
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
recharge. You give me the hardest time.
No,
But
I
if you
know.
see
Like
me in my like
really,
spare time, ask
yeah,
Graham,
yeah.
ask Graham, he'll tell you.
On
You
on the
just
scale of introversion, you're closer to like the middle. You're not like
probably,
hard.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
No.
but I do like need alone time. And like I'll say to Graham sometimes, like if I had a really long day where there was like tons of talking, I'll just be like at the end of the day, like, hey, I'm like out of words. Like I just don't want to talk anymore. So I'll say like, oh, like if we're gonna hang out, we just like watch a show together, like put on a documentary or like read a book in the same room together beside each other, like something like that. Cause I feel like it's still like it's normal to have those moments. It's normal to feel like, oh my gosh, I just
Yeah.
need quiet time sometimes. And if you're dating somebody, you can totally like cancel, and that's okay as long as you like give a healthy explanation and share. Um, or you can hang out with somebody and just say, I want to hang out, but I don't really want to talk that much. And like that's also okay for people in that space too, I think.
Yeah, yeah. That must be harder, I guess, for APs to sort of process because they're like, oh, but like I haven't seen you all day. I want to connect. I really want to connect. But I guess, it's so easy for me to like put myself in the shoes of the more avoidant type behaviors and such. And then with the AP type, sometimes I'm like, I want to know more about how they feel about it. So I wonder if they, when somebody does communicate the need for space and just let them know it's not you, there's no jeopardy of the relationship, ending or any problems here, but I do need to take this evening off. Do you think if somebody's hardcore AP, they're kind of like sitting at home, like super disappointed or super thinking, oh, I know they told me that, but what's
I
really
think
going on here?
I think so. I'll tell you exactly what I would do if I had an AP spouse.
Yeah.
First thing, I would, before canceling, I would say, hey, I am down to hang out tonight. I know we have plans. But I'm just really exhausted and like I just want to do something quiet. Like I actually don't want to spend a ton of time talking. Can we watch like
Mhm.
the documentary we've been talking about for a while? Or can we listen to podcasts together quietly? Like, can we just have
Mhm.
a really quiet night? And then if I was hanging out with them and they were like talking and kind of like like misunderstanding like where I'm at, I would actually just like reiterate it. I would be like, "Hey, I really care about you. I love spending time with you. This is one of those particular days where I really just don't feel like going into talking too much, and I would love to
Yeah.
still be able to hang out and just have some quiet time together. And I'm hoping that like that can be a dynamic of our relationship, an aspect of our relationship where sometimes it's okay to have quiet together and just hang out. And
Yeah.
I would hope that we could grow into that together. And if I saw that be like something that the person couldn't do, which anxious attachment styles are so good at like looking out for people's needs and like caring. So I think usually when you like really explain or remind them, they'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, okay. And they'll really try to respect it. But if for whatever reason somebody wasn't able to do that, in those cases, then I would actually just share like the natural consequences. So
Mhm.
not in like a threatening way, not to be rude or mean, but I would say, like, hey, I might just leave a little early. I really care about you. I really love you. I'm grateful for our relationship. I'm grateful where this is going. I just like really need quiet time. I'm so exhausted. I'm just going to head out a little bit earlier. So I would just share it like from that perspective where you're being validating and reassuring, but still honoring your need if like your boundary keeps accidentally getting violated.
Mhm.
And if I saw that was still a pattern, then I would cancel plans when I felt really tired and just do it in a
Yeah. Yeah.
reassuring way. So I would do it in advance and say, hey, I really care about you. I'm just exhausted. I really need some time to myself to just recharge. And I would just specifically say, like, this is just for now. I'm just needing this tonight. And I would say something validating. So again, they wouldn't feel like too hurt or wounded by the experience.
Sure. 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 Okay. That makes sense. Unless you have anything else on that point, we'll go to our
Yeah,
next
let's
item.
do it. Yeah.
Okay. So ideally, someone who's not controlling. There's obviously going to be a huge amount of resistance for an FA if somebody's trying to control them in any way, shape, or form. But it was very interesting how FAs have a high need for control for themselves in order to not get hurt. So I thought, you're the FA expert if you want to kick it off. Why is it such, why do FAs have such, like nobody wants to be controlled, but like, why can FAs sniff that out really quick if they're trying to be controlled and be like really, really put up their defenses?
It's so funny because every time you say one, I'm like, ooh, what a good one. That
I
would have
remember that
triggered me
one.
so much back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so much of it. For sure, it's a shadow piece because usually it's a fearful avoidant. And like you just hit the nail on the head there, which is like fearful avoidant attachment styles. They'll often get into a situation where like they felt controlled in their childhood. And so that becomes a subconscious comfort zone. And then they won't want to control other people because they don't want to infringe on other people's freedom. They know that other people need freedom because that's part of them, but they control themselves. They usually control their routines, their habits, the way they spend their time. They tend to want to like control what's going on in their own life a lot of the time.
Micromanage kind of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, wait, what did you say? I didn't hear you.
I said micromanage everything, like sort of make sure
Yeah.
everything's taken care of in every single little area. I remember like when a partner, I'm at their house or they're at my house, or when I lived with a past relationship, they would want you to do something for them, but then you're doing it, and then they're telling you all the ways you're not doing it right, and then they're just like, just forget it, just let me do it. You're just like, okay, you asked for help, and then try to give it to you, and then you getting mad at me. So
That
go
is
right
a
ahead.
great way to negatively reinforce your partner from doing anything ever,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Sorry to cut you off there.
oh no, you're good. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely that. And usually because there's such negative feelings around being controlled, usually the core wounds attached to that are like I'm being made to feel trapped or powerless or out of control.
Mm.
And so those can be things that are so triggering for a fearful avoidant as a whole. So I have some really exciting news, and it's that integrated attachment theory training is back. In other words, you can be trained to become a relationship coach certified in integrated attachment theory in literally 60 days. So who is this for? Well, of course, this is for any individual who wants to make an impact and really be of service to others while also obtaining freedom and flexibility and abundance in their lives. And this is also for anybody who's already a counselor, a therapist, a coach, and just really wants to expand their toolkit. We've had so many people enter into the integrated attachment theory program because they're just looking to obtain a certain degree of mastery in terms of understanding their own attachment patterns and also the attachment patterns of maybe their children or partner or other loved ones in their lives, so they can really support those people and understand them more deeply. Now, please keep in mind that the last 2 times we ran this program, we filled up very fast. In fact, we oversold the programs and sold out completely. So if you're interested, click the link below to learn more and dive in with me. And I'd love to see you on the other side before seats run out. I actually want to like flip it back to you because I feel like I'm rambling on. So what would you say you've seen in terms of when you've tried to, I guess you probably never really tried to be controlling. You're like the least controlling person.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
What about when you've seen a partner who was fearful avoidant, when somebody was being controlling to them? So for example, maybe they had a controlling family member or a boss, and like what were some themes that you saw?
Sorry, say that again. Like if I was the person who had a controlling boss? No.
No, if you had a partner who had a controlling boss yeah, and your partner was fearful avoidant.
Yeah, major resistance and coming home every day, and you have to hear about it for a long time because that's just so like, yeah, it's so tough for them. And they're already their inner dialogue is kind of perfectionistic and they can be quite hard on themselves. So then when a superior, someone else is kind of adding more of that pressure and, demanding more, they're just like, what the hell is this, right? Like it's just the straw that broke the camel's back. So I think, for them being controlled is just like an added layer of the inner sort of control that they have within themselves. And it's like another person adding more onto that scale. And it's just like, it's just too much.
Yeah, I think when you said that too, like you raised something so important, which is that being a perfectionist, some fearful avoidants are not perfectionists that can kind of go in one direction or the other. You know me, who even when I was fearful avoidant, I was not much of a perfectionist.
You should have seen Tice's car 10 years ago. We won't give details about it, but you wouldn't call this person a perfectionist if you saw that car. But now
that's fair. That's fair. That's so a very messy car.
Yeah.
So you can see though when people are perfectionists, when they are the fearful avoidant, like because they say with trauma, right? It goes one direction or the other. So either you like resist routine and structure a little bit, or if you are controlled, you become really controlling of everything. And if you're a perfectionist, that is a mechanism for control. It's trying to control people's perceptions of you. It's trying to control how things go all the time. And it doesn't mean don't like hold yourself to a high standard and show up. It's more like, hey, you can hold yourself to a standard and show up, but have a grace for yourself at the same time. And that's really that space.
So yeah, in order to sort of not, I guess, attract someone like that, you have to make that your own comfort zone. So I guess I imagine releasing control in your own life would be the huge driver of not, being controlled and not sort of controlling yourself all the time. So what that would look like, I think, is just, if your partner wants to do something a certain way, but you're like, no, they're doing it wrong, just sort of let them do it. Like if nobody's going to be harmed, the world's not going to end if they're like washing the dishes, not the way that you usually would do it. Just sort of let it happen. Like really realize that like, everyone's coming to the table with different sort of beliefs on how to do like everything, like, small things, just day-to-day things in their life. And just realize like your way, even though might feel this way, like your way is not always the best way. It's probably the best way for you, but people are going to do things in a different way. And just let them sometimes. Like it's good to sort of just release control sometimes and be like, you know what? If they're going to, I don't know, mow the lawn that way, that's not the way that I would do it, but it's getting done. So let's just let that happen. Trying to get like a better.
No,
Yeah.
it's such a great example. And I want to really highlight this for fearful avoidance listening, which is if you always try to do it your way and you always try to have it done just so, which again, sometimes fearful avoidance are not like this at all, but there's definitely like at least half of fearful avoidance will go that direction. Um, then you'll always end up doing it alone. And I think
You
it's this
did.
really important point, like you shared about your ex and how if you did the dishes wrong, like, no, 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 I'm just going to do it. Or, situations like that within the home. And that's a
Mm.
great way to just like build your own invisible prison, like just to always have to do everything on your own all the time. Because if you don't surrender control when you're asking for help, or if you don't ever ask for help because you're trying to control how things go, then this
Mm.
idea of like, oh, I just have to do it myself, or I'm just going to figure it out, or not trusting people to do it as well as you do it, or a lot of these like types of beliefs that will show up for fearful avoidance, what that leads to is you taking everything on all the time, doing it all alone, and then feeling alone in that process, feeling like nobody's supporting me or nobody's here for me. So I think it's a really important checkpoint for somebody who is fearful avoidant to also be like okay with it not being 100% perfect and okay
Yeah.
with having that ability to release control so that you can get some support. And I know we kind of talked originally about the expectation as being like not having somebody control me. And I kind of went off course there a little bit, but the other thing too is if you're worried about somebody being controlling, then that's also sometimes a call for boundaries, right? Also, sometimes we'll see that, you feel controlled because maybe not somebody's not even that controlling, but maybe it's because you're not expressing your truth. You're not saying, hey, this is what I feel in this situation. This is what I need in this situation. And so that's another checkpoint for those of you that go the other direction as a fearful avoidant, where you're like people pleasing too much. And that causes you to then feel out of control and feel like people are controlling your time or your energy or how you show up. Well, maybe that's actually because you haven't set boundaries in your life enough. And I think that's an important
I was,
point.
I was going to say I had a lack of boundaries for sure. Yeah, I guess we switched it a little bit with the cafe being the controlling one, but I just want to mention one more thing on that topic. Yeah, I remember having partners sort of like kicking my butt all the time, like you didn't make the bed properly, or like you didn't sweep the floor properly. Like I'm not the most detail oriented perfectionist person when it comes to cleaning, and I would always get a little bummed out because it's like, well, like, okay, it's not perfect, but at least I took the time to clean the house, or at least I took the time to clean the car, whatever action item it was. So I just want FAs to like look at that and be like, well, at least they did it 99% right. Like again, maybe with that black and white thinking, like, let's look at the gray area here. The person showed up and put in 1 hour of effort to do something. Maybe they didn't do it to like 5-star gold standard, but that's pretty good effort. So would you say like for the FA to sort of maybe look at that a little bit more, look at more of, hey, wow, they're really trying here. They're trying to show up. Yeah, that they're not, doing it perfect, but it looks like they're doing it pretty darn okay.
100%. Yeah. And that's like compromise. And that's where, you're going to actually let people in and let people support you. And sometimes it's important for
Yeah,
you to look at that upside, like you said, like to be able to say, okay, look, and we can still give feedback. This also isn't saying like if you ask your spouse to fold the laundry and they just freaking cram it into the drawer or stuff it somewhere and it's not even folded at all, that you can't like have a conversation. but, but what you
yeah,
can do is you can say, hey, I so appreciate that you did the laundry. Like, thank you so much. And usually when I fold it, I kind of put it like this. And no
yeah,
pressure for it to be perfect, but just really appreciate if we can try to do a little more that way next time. Like you can still be gentle in your approach and like give
for
feedback,
sure.
but what you don't want
Yeah.
to do is be like, what's wrong with this laundry? Like, I can't believe it's like this. Like, what were you thinking? Because then right away, somebody just feels like, oh my gosh, why am I bothering?
See, I need, and this is probably just human behavior, but like I need the reason why you're getting bent out of shape about that. So if I'm putting the laundry not away perfectly, but then you explain to me, hey, just to let you know, when you just put the laundry in that way, it comes out wrinkled. And then when I go to work, like I have to give a presentation, I have a super wrinkled shirt. Then I'm like, oh shoot, like, yeah, I definitely don't want that to happen. You know what I mean? But if I think they're just being anal and like picky for like no good reason, that almost makes me not want to like do it perfect.
Just rebel.
Yeah, maybe it's a rebellion, but Yeah,
I
I just need to know, maybe that's a me thing or maybe a more avoidant thing, but if I can hear the why behind it, you're just letting me know without getting angry or losing it on me, and just letting me know, hey, actually, like I'm not just ripping on you, I'm letting you know, like actually when you do it this way, this happens, and it doesn't make me feel good.
I completely agree with that. I think that's an
Yeah.
amazing point of communication, like to make sure
Mhm.
you share what's actually going on, because then the person doesn't just project whatever their story is onto it. Oh, they're just being uptight. Instead, they're
Yeah.
like, no, no, no. Oh, I see why you're coming at it from this perspective and why this is meaningful to you. So I completely agree. I think that's great
Yeah.
feedback.
Again, that's letting somebody in on your reality, like the way that you perceive reality, which sometimes you're like, oh, okay, I didn't see that perspective, obviously. And now you're showing me a different perspective. So it makes sense to me. So we got to just communicate without losing it on each other.
100%. Okay, let's do the next. We'll do the next expectation. That's awesome.
Okay. You love this one, eh? The essays. Um, Someone who can deal with our angry outbursts, not take them personal, and basically someone who can deal with hot and cold behavior, hot and cold emotions.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good one.
is that
Can I tell a
yeah that
story to start this one
yeah
off?
do it.
I remember being in a relationship and somebody saying to me, so this is like a long time ago, but this is like, I don't know, 14 years ago maybe. And I was in a relationship and it was like a serious relationship for the age that I was at least. And we lived together and all this stuff. And he said to me at one point, he was like, do you always threaten to leave people in relationships? Because like and I remember my first reaction, I might have shared this on the podcast already, or maybe I told this story in like a webinar. My first reaction was to be like, no. And as it was coming out of my mouth, I was like analyzing it at the same time. And as I was saying no out loud, I realized it was a yes. And it was like I assumed that no, I wasn't doing that. And it was kind of like one of those because I hadn't done the work yet at all. Like I still like was just about to start the work. I was kind of probably a few months later, I had this big like shift and like really dove deep into like a lot of the self-work and like accountability. But um
Mhm.
I planted the seed of realization that I came to touch on later and recognize that, wow, I get triggered by people. And when I'm triggered, I'm so in my own emotions that I think that all of my behavior is justified because they triggered me. They started it. So however I react, all bets are off. Like I can do whatever I
Mhm.
want. And I
Mhm.
realized like that's not okay. Like that's not a way to live. Like just because somebody hurt me first doesn't mean that all of my emotions or reactions are justified. Doesn't mean that I can cut deep with my words and say something harsh and not and that not affect somebody. Like just because somebody else started it, quote unquote, or somebody hurt me doesn't make my behaviors less volatile. And
Yeah.
what I realized it was like, oh my gosh, here I am. I'm like pushing somebody away or like threatening to leave the relationship every few months or, doing all these things, like being really harsh or critical. And like, wow, like that's so painful for someone. Like that's actually hurting somebody so
Mhm.
much. I can't believe that. That would hurt me so much if somebody did that to me. And it was like just so mind blowing. And I share that because I think that when a fearful avoidant, because your triggers can run so deep, because there's usually a lot of attachment trauma there from the past. I think
Mhm.
when a fearful avoidant is so hurt, they end up in a situation where they're so hurt that like they can't see themselves. They can't see, how their behaviors affect other people. And also because it's usually in reaction to what somebody else did,
Yeah.
then it almost feels like it's justified. And I want it to be like a call to like, hey, volatility is one of the top three relationship killers, number one. And number
Mhm.
two, just because you were hurt first doesn't mean that any response to that hurt is justified. And
Yeah.
I think it's so important to still be accountable for like how you show up, how you react to things. It doesn't mean you just put up with hurt and become a doormat. And I know that I also used to think that I had to be like feisty about things because I was so scared of being a doormat in my life. That I like overcompensated for it. But instead I just learned, oh, like you can still say, hey, that really hurt me. That behavior is unacceptable. We need to work on that and then vet and make sure that somebody's actually changing their behavior and doing the work with you or leave the
Mhm.
relationship if it's not happening, if you're not seeing progress. But what you don't want to do is just, come off really harshly, be really critical, just start an argument because you're hurt. Like that doesn't get your needs met. It doesn't get you seen. It doesn't get you heard and it doesn't make you a better person for behaving that way. So
Yeah.
I just think it's an important checkpoint.
Yeah, no, super important to share that. And I do find though FAs do tend to, after those volatile emotional outbursts, do tend to feel a little bit like a
Guilty
little
like
bit of shame
crazy.
and a little bit of guilt, and they will come back around and usually say sorry and like, yeah, I didn't mean to say that. Because like you said, sometimes it can be quite like cutting, like pretty fierce. But again, we know that's just because the good communication wasn't modeled in childhood, so it just kind of comes out all at once. It's just a lot of emotion. So I always thought that was kind of nice that the person would, it would feel bad at the time and you'd feel like not great while it's happening. But it's really nice that somebody can kind of be self-aware and come back around and be like, hey, like I'm really sorry. Like I think I overreacted there. And
Yeah.
that's been
And
my
it's
experience.
100%. And like, oh my gosh, like I can tell you times where I said things and felt so guilty after and wrote notes. I'm so sorry I was mean. Like, like all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And you feel so badly, I think, as a fearful avoidant too, because you're like, you really love and you really care and you don't want to hurt someone. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I hurt them. So there's that, which is very redemptive in terms of equality. But I know when I look back on when I was a true FA and really hadn't done any work yet, my honest
Mhm.
evaluation of my own patterns is that I would feel so guilty and say, so I'm so sorry. And I would write notes or apologize, profusely. And then I would repeat the pattern. And I would keep doing that until I really learned how to work on my subconscious mind, which is where all those patterns really come from. And so I just want to encourage people too, if you are listening and you do see that you do repeat the pattern, that has to be an accountability piece. Like, hey, if I say I'm so sorry and I feel so sorry, but I'm not doing the work on it, then it's still causing harm in relationships. So it's still something super important to be aware of. It will harm your relationships. Like it will cause you to accidentally push people away slowly but surely over time until then, the relationship doesn't work. And so it's also kind of sabotaging in a way from what you may actually want as like the highest expression of yourself.
Definitely. And yeah, like you said, I guess I was fortunate enough that nobody said anything so bad where I felt like it was irreparable. But, at some point in time, you might say something that's really cutting and it might be hard for the person to come back to, even if you're saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Well,
But
did you ever feel like, sure, like there wasn't a one-off? Because I can look back, like I didn't say things that were like in that moment, the relationship ended, like you're not saying stuff that's like that bad,
yeah,
but like things where like they hurt and they hurt. And maybe like when you reflect back now, dating people like that, they would say sorry and it felt like it kind of redeemed it and it was okay. But then like over time, when somebody keeps doing that, do you not find yourself like pulling away over time in the past
yeah,
too?
I guess it probably chiseled away sort of at your self-esteem or thinking, okay, does this person really want to be with me? Like,
Yeah.
if that's how you really feel and that's what you're, saying, like, yeah, I know you're sorry and didn't mean to say it, but if you said it probably more than once, then yeah, that probably would have some harm
Totally.
over a period of time. Yeah, that
And the
makes
person
sense.
doesn't fight in a way that like creates a resolution. And I am not saying this for any fearful avoidant listening. If you hear yourself in this, I am not saying this to like harp on fearful avoidance or give you a hard time. I'm saying this because this realization helped me be accountable for my own
Yeah,
behaviors and do the work. And that
yeah,
like literally changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I'm so thankful for it. So that's me just coming from an
yeah.
honest place. And hopefully that lands with somebody
Oh yeah,
listening.
you're like the super FA compassionate. You know what I find so interesting that I don't know where we got this stat, but like they said 5% of the population is FA. I
Yeah.
still feel like that's got to be so off. What do you think? I'm gonna put it at like 35%, but obviously, that's just my own perception. What do you think? You think
It's
5% is an accurate
so
number?
hard for me to say um because of a couple things. There's this I've researched about this concept a lot once upon a time because I actually had a client like 10 years ago who was doing her master's degree in organizational psychology. And she was really interested in it and she'd come and tell me stuff sometimes. And we were having a conversation one day because she was struggling with her boss. And she said, well, he's a narcissist. And so, because he's a narcissist from an organizational psychology standpoint, that's going to make the organization narcissistic, meaning there will be a lack of empathy throughout the organization, a sense of entitlement, a sense of exploitation or manipulation or deceit. And
Hmm.
I was like, wait, why? And she was like, that's how it works. Whoever the personalities are at the top are often going to attract similarities of what they are. And so it's super interesting. You actually can see this across organizations. And I feel like it's not quite related, but it's like a tangent. It's like a cousin of that principle because I was
Yeah.
fearful avoidant and often speak the most to fearful avoidance and probably relate the most to people who were fearful avoidant on their attachment healing journey. I would often see a skew of people coming into PDS who are fearful avoidant, right? So we see like students in
Yeah.
PDS. So it like we kind of, because we probably relate the most to those people, and it's such an underserved market of people. And
Yeah.
having the most fearful avoidance in there. So our sample size is biased. And even when I was running my practice, again, biased sample size. So it's hard to say, like I can't, it's hard for me to tell for sure
It is.
because of that. But I can tell you one thing for sure is like the percentage of people who would self-report on what they thought their attachment style was is like way blown out. Like it's not near, it's so understated. I would
Yeah.
see all the time when I had clients, dismissive avoidance would come in and they would be like, I'm secure. When I would talk to them about their attachment style and what they were, because they
Yeah.
would think, like, because I'm not really emotional, I'm probably the secure
Yeah.
one. And
Yeah.
because I'm not fighting all the time and I don't like conflict, I'm the secure one. Anxious attachment styles, their like famous line would be like, oh yeah, I'm mostly secure, but I might have a little bit of anxiousness in there. And then after like one or two sessions, I'd be like, they're full blown anxiously attached. Fearful
Yeah.
avoidance generally knew they were fearful avoidant. They would be like, I'm the chaotic one. But a lot of times, they would think they were anxious at first because as a fearful avoidant, you really notice your anxious side. But
Yeah.
then your dismissive side, your avoidance side, when you like shut down or numb out or push people away reactively, those are all like either it's reactively, so you're not thinking of like how you're coping with it and self-analyzing, or you are just numbing out. So it's not as loud, it's not as
Yeah.
obvious. So I find that people misreport, and I feel like that skews
For
things a little
sure.
bit.
Yeah. The most I've heard is where people are telling me they're dating someone that they think is secure. And I'm like, this person's super avoidant. Like, they sort of fooled you a little bit. Not fooled you, they're trying to come across that way, but dismissive avoidance, I think, can sort of seem like they're calm, they don't get rattled, they're just very like, you know, they got it going on, like everything's fine, but really it's just you can't see into the inner turmoil going on inside of them. So they sort of mask it and suppress it better than anybody else.
I totally see that. Okay, wait, let me
Yeah.
ask you a question on that topic really quick. So,
Yeah.
on that topic, when you would see yourself first dating, I'm totally taking this off track, but when you would first start dating people, did you feel
Yeah.
like you came across as secure when you were dismissive avoidant in the early stages of dating?
Yeah, I probably always thought like the other person was too emotional or like up and down, like we talked about, hot and cold. Like I think I thought other people who were highly emotional were like that was like a problem, and they just didn't know how to like
Repress.
regulate it. Yeah, exactly. Like I thought it was normal that I was repressing and didn't cry all the time, and I thought them crying was like they have no control, and it was sometimes scary. I was like, it was unpredictable. I felt like emotions or high emotions were like unpredictable, so like really scary.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think I thought like I had things the way I was probably better because I could hold things in and I wouldn't make emotional rash decisions or just all of a sudden have an outburst of some sort. Until I realized, and we talked about it before, like it takes a lot of energy to hold all that stuff in.
Yeah.
And I'm actually at the point in the last 2 years where I really applaud people for crying, and especially like crying in front of people. Like, you know me, I love UFC, and the UFC fighters are among some of the most, tough guys ever. And sometimes at press conferences, you'll see a UFC guy after a victory or whatnot talk about their family, and they start like crying, and it's like before I would have been like, whoa, what a wimp, or that's so like not manly or whatever. But now I'm like that's like the manliest thing you can do, to like cry in front of like
One
a
time
group of
you
people.
messaged one of them from my Instagram.
You get me back for the card joke, okay? Yeah, that was hilarious.
I was like, what is this?
Guys, I love UFC so much. And I didn't have Instagram up until like 2 months ago. So I took an opportunity to message a UFC fighter from Tyson's IG account. And he responded back. But
Oh, did he? I never even looked. That's
yeah,
so
yeah, I think he
funny.
did.
Mike was
Yeah.
helping with managing our like personal development school Instagram, like
Yeah.
directing requests and stuff with a whole bunch of things we had going on for this like snippet of time. And I went in there one day and there was like a message to a UFC fighter.
I love you, man. I think you're amazing. Yeah,
You were
that's
like,
good.
that speech was so amazing. And
Yeah, yeah,
anyways, but that was nice. Like it was nice that you that like touched you obviously and you were like giving support. Just
yeah,
be better if you were
yeah,
like, by the way, this isn't Thais.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Don't go telling everybody. Tice Gibson loves me.
It's okay.
But just to like finish that point is like DA is actually, yeah, there's two sides of it. Sometimes you're like, whoa, like you have no control. This is crazy. But then there's another side I think that looks at it. I was like, that's quite beautiful to like have this caring, beautiful heart, and like you'll cry over your loved ones and whatnot. So yeah, point there is like in the past I thought, repression was the best thing to do, but it came at such a price that I'm glad that I got to, heal a lot of that, which is super grateful for.
That's so cool. We have covered some major expectations of the fearful avoidance ideal relationship. We still have one or two more that we want to share with you, but we're going to wrap this episode for today because there's still a lot to cover. And going into the episode coming up in a couple of days, what you will learn is the other major expectations fearful avoidants have for a relationship, how we can healthily reframe them. And we'll also do a deep dive into fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant attachment styles and why they struggle to plan for the future. Some of them and other ones, maybe not so much. So stay tuned. Thank you so much, Mike, for hosting this with me today. You can also find out more about Mike down below if you want to check out the social media handles. And you can also check out, we are running for the month of November, a 14-day free trial site-wide to the whole personal development school if you want to check out any course. And of course, within there, there's all of the attachment style bootcamp healing programs that you can check out as per your attachment style too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you subscribe. I hope you come back and appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.